Hi there and welcome to the channel, and the first thing I must do is apologise for my absence. I don't regard it as a protracted one, but it's been longer than anticipated. What have I been doing during the intervening time? Well, it is reading related. I spent 3 weeks reading a single novel. No, it wasn't Finnegan's Wake. No, it wasn't Ulysses. It was actually quite a short novel, 110 pages or so, but it wasn't in English. It was the first full novel I've read in French. And here it is, Boileau-Narcejac, in this collection of their crime writing. And this is called 40 Years of Suspense. And the novel I read is the first. The title in English would be The Shadow and the Prey. Not really a great title. And actually, it wasn't really a great novel. It was a story set in a big house on the sea where a highly dysfunctional family were basically dropping like flies as they killed themselves, as they killed one another. And the detective showed up. He was quite eccentric and he carried out a rather lame investigation, in truth, by the end of which he didn't so much as arrest the culprit, but he just announced, well, everyone who's going to kill themselves or kill someone else is basically dead now. So I'll tell you pretty much what happened, but there was no one alive to corroborate his story, which he told to the two elderly domestics who were basically not considered important enough for anyone to kill. So yes, not really a very satisfying effort, but it may have been their first attempt at writing crime fiction. However, as a learner, I greatly benefited from this novel. It was full of descriptions, and I extracted all of the new verbs, nouns, and phrases into a spreadsheet. So at the end, I knew just how much I had benefited. There were 1,000 new nouns, 500 new verbs, and almost 1,000 phrases. So that was highly profitable. And after putting it down, I was so pleased. I thought, I know, 3 weeks to read the first novel in French. How many days or weeks to read the second one? So then I picked up from the shelf this folio edition of Patrick Modiano's Dans le Café de Jeunessse Perdue, which in English, and it has been translated, is In the Cafe of Lost Youth. He has been awarded the Nobel Prize, as it informs you on the cover, and this is around 150 pages long. So I got started, and to cut a long story short, this novel only took me 3 days to finish, and that's not because suddenly I become an amazing reader of French, but rather this was such thin gravy. It was gruel, basically, and I was still extracting verbs, nouns, and phrases to my spreadsheet. And by the end of this, I had learned 30 new verbs, 100 new nouns, and 20 new phrases, which shows you just how lacking in richness this was. As for the novel itself, it lacked a unifying frame. It concerned a character, Luki, a young woman, and it was various people who encountered Luki kind of rambling about their memories of her. So it began with a student who had been hanging out at this bohemian cafe in Paris, and Luki had been one of the customers, one of the regulars, and he had been attracted to her. And he was a student at one of the top universities in France, and he was kind of slumming and hiding his elite educational credentials from the rest of this crowd, who were these kind of archetypal, beautiful losers. And then it moved on, the second section, to a detective who was recalling investigating the disappearance of Luki, who'd run away from her husband out in the Parisian suburbs. And he basically did manage to track her down, but then had a decision to weigh over whether to inform the husband or not. And then we moved on to a section that was written by Luki herself, her chaotic early life. Her mother was a dancer at the Moulin Rouge, and she was a child of the streets. And her first love was basically Paris. And then we had 2 sections at the end from the same person, Roland, who'd been a sometime lover of Luki. And then you had this really cheap, tawdry ending, which really devalued the whole reading experience for me. I won't spoil it by telling you what happens. This novel was a mix, an unhappy mix of Milan Kundera's intellectualism, as found in the Unbearable Lightness of Being. You had lots of references to dark matter and eternal return in here. Eternal return is a big feature of Kundera's novel. And then you had this noirish existentialism of Paul Auster, his New York trilogy, in the section with the detective. And then finally you had Murakami's blending of dreams and reality. But Modiano doesn't go as far as any of those writers in exploring each particular form of writing. So this was just very watered down. I didn't really understand at the end why people would bother with this. It didn't have much going for it. And probably the most infuriating thing is when Modiano runs out of ideas, he just starts naming streets. So actually, this book you could probably use to travel around Paris on foot or on the metro, because it just goes on and on like an A to Z, which he also did in his Via Triste, which I read in English, which was even more tedious than this. Of the sections in this, the first one was actually the best. Where he does score highly is he is quite good at dealing with the way memory works, the way we'll suddenly have something happen that triggers a memory. It's much more sophisticated in his treatment than you'll typically find. So yeah, as a writer who explores memory, he does score quite highly. But I finished that book and I was rather relieved and went on to something else. So the next one I've picked up is Marguerite Yourcenar, and she is one of my favorite writers. She's from Belgium and she had an incredible education. She didn't go to school, she just had professors teach her. So she's full of classical learning, and her most famous novel is Memories of Hadrian, or Memoirs of Hadrian. Can't remember offhand, it's down there on the floor. But this one is all about her dreams, and it's extracted from a longer work, and it opens intriguingly with her short essay on the nature of dreams, which recalled to Quincey's writing about dreams, Sir Thomas Browne's. Yeah, it's just beautifully formed. And actually, in about 10 pages or so, she went into it in more depth than Modiano managed to in the whole of his novel, because he was also clumsily trying to explain the relationship between dreams and reality. But Marguerite Yourcenar, an intellectual powerhouse, did a much better job. And the dreams in here are very short. So you could say I'm kind of cheating again because I don't have to follow the plot of a whole novel, but it's extremely rich. And the sentence structures are really impressive. I'm just totally in awe of her writing. So I'm going to read this next. But for any of you out there who may be French yourself, who read French literature, I'll show you my other folio books and you can point me towards the ones that you think I might enjoy, or you can list some other French authors you think might delight me. That would be great. So here I'm going to show you 8 books or so. I have Poe's stories in French. They're all folio editions here, so I could read that. I also have this one, his only novel, The Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym. I could read that one. And then I've been reading some of this. It's Simone de Beauvoir. It's the first installment of her autobiography, and it's written in a very clear way. So actually, despite being almost 400 pages long, I could potentially read this now. This one was very popular in France, I believe. It's Muriel Barbery with The Elegance of the Hedgehog. I've got this in Spanish too, so if you think this is good, let me know. Marguerite Duras, I've already reviewed a bunch of her books for the channel. I could read Le Deleur in French. Someone would have to offer me some guidance on just how difficult that might be. She is a very complex writer. I have another Marguerite Yourcenar here. Okay, so, and then 2 more to conclude. Leclésio, JMG Leclésio. I believe he spent some time in Mexico, which makes him an attractive writer for me. And this is a collection of his short stories. And the title, I believe, these faits divers are short newspaper stories. And again, I like stuff that is based on kind of factual events or engages with newspaper culture, which I'm a huge fan of. So maybe this would be good. And finally, I don't know much about this. It's got a Greek sounding name, but it is the Delicatesse. So this one I noticed going through seems very unusual in terms of its structure, and it has quite a few lists as well. So let me know. I'm trying to draw on the channel's audience as a resource to help me as I delve further and further into French literature. But I believe that's pretty much all I have to say for now. So I'll be back very shortly with the next installment of my life writing series before the month is out. But until then, all I need to do is bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.